Folks, boy, it is heating up quick. And I got to tell you, we're not looking at anything real positive here in terms of a political solution. Washington is so broken that we can no longer look at trying to resolve the symptoms of the disease that pervades our government. You see, it's no longer a disease that we can ignore. What we have happening in our nation daily now, and an advancing, incredibly advanced pace, is beyond comprehension for most Americans. And that's why everyone is uncomfortable with what to do next. I posted an article up on our Facebook page this morning. Democrat and Clinton fundraiser pleads guilty. His quote, and he's guilty of funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars into Hillary Clinton's campaign and other campaigns in the Democrat Party. And he's a wealthy hotel magnate, and he's pleading guilty to campaign finance fraud. By the way, have you heard any of the Democrats stand up and say we're returning that money, or we're going to turn it over to a children's food program, or maybe an adoption center or whatever? No, you won't. Here's the problem, folks. Here's what he has to say. And this was in his trial. That's the only way to buy them, to get into the system, is to buy them. Here's a guy who's worth, I don't know how many millions of dollars. And he made it clear that the only way to get the attention of Congress is to buy them. That's the only way to get inside the system. Well, let me tell you something. We cannot allow a single cell of this cancer to remain in the body of our republic. Both parties have so heinously betrayed us that there is no hope for our constitutionally guaranteed Republican form of government, with the duopoly of treason running the show. Fire them all and label each and every member of the House this coming election dishonorably discharged. The truth is, without that, we will have a nation that descends into tyranny and terrorism. Terrorism sponsored not by some Islamic extremist, not by some external force, but by our own nation. In fact, a congressman just the other day accused Obama and the administration of illegal action at the Bundy Ranch based on U.S. Code 43, Section 1733, subsection C. And this is an interesting argument here. And it's not an unusual one, but it's amazing that the mainstream media hasn't brought this out to anyone's attention. He was holding a hearing here, and it's Steve Stockman, the Texas Republican. He cites the fact that the federal government has limited powers because the Bureau has, quote, no right to assume preemptory police powers. That role is reserved to the states. And he explains that many federal laws require the federal government to seek assistance from local law enforcement whenever the use of force may be necessary. Because of this standoff, I've looked into the BLM's authority to conduct such paramilitary raids against American citizens. And it appears that BLM is acting in a lawless manner in Nevada. Here's what the section says. And then read this, or with me, analyze this with me, and tell me that he's not right. Then tell me who is the domestic terrorist here. Harry Reid and his crew, his gang of thugs, or the millions of Americans that support the Bundys. When the Secretary determines that assistance is necessary in enforcing federal laws and regulations relating to the public lands or their resources, he shall, that means must, offer a contract to appropriate local officials having law enforcement authority within their respective jurisdictions with the view of achieving maximum feasible reliance upon local law enforcement officials in enforcing such laws and regulations. U.S. Code 43, Section 1733, subsection C. In the case of the Bundy Ranch, Stockman goes on to say the relevant local law enforcement official here appears to be the sheriff of Clark County, Nevada, Doug Gillespie. Gillespie, however, by the way, for the record, just took a back seat and said, well, you know, he's a friend and a supporter of Harry Reid. And indeed, says Stockman, the exact type of crisis that the federal government has provoked at the Bundy Ranch is the very type of incident that Congress knew could be avoided by relying on local law enforcement officials. So let's understand and take a look at exactly where this thing goes. In Reuters, there was an article called After the Nevada Ranch Standoff, Emboldened Militias Ask, Where Next? All right. I want you to just live with me on this for a few moments. I want you to hear the way that they couch this, and then I'm going to interject some commentary as we go through the story. Flat on his belly, in a sniper position, wearing a baseball cap and a flak jacket, a protester aimed his semi-automatic rifle from the edge of an overpass and waited as a crowd below stood its ground against the U.S. federal agents in the Nevada desert. Now, the exercise here, folks, is to do this. Put on your critical thinking skills and recognize not that we're comparing something that we would agree with or disagree with. We want to look at this completely objectively, and we want to recognize the propaganda when we're seeing it, because words do matter. And it's important that you understand how the mainstream media attempts to propagandize and focus the attention of the reading or the public that's being educated, however they, under whatever media it is, whether it's video or print or what have you. All right, it goes on to say, he was part of a 1,000-strong coalition of armed militiamen, cowboys on horseback, gun rights activists, and others who rallied to Cliven Bundy's Bunkerville Ranch, about 80 miles northeast of Las Vegas, in a standoff with about a dozen agents from the Federal Bureau of Land Management. The Rangers had rounded up hundreds of Bundy's cattle, which had been grazing illegally on federal lands for 2 decades. Bundy had refused to pay grazing fees, saying he did not recognize the government's authority over the land, a view that attracted vocal support from some right-wing groups. Citing, do you hear the problems inherent in what we've read so far, which is really only 3 paragraphs? First of all, they're characterizing this guy in a sniper position, a protester aiming his, and they make sure that they clarify that it's a semi-automatic rifle from the edge of an overpass, and waited as a crowd below stood its ground against U.S. federal agents in the Nevada desert. Part of a 1,000-strong coalition of armed militiamen. Oh, I'm sorry, folks. That's not true. There weren't 1,000 armed militiamen there. But the way in which they put their words together is clearly is designed to incite you to feel disgust or hatred for these people before they've even gotten into the details of the story. And then they say, in a standoff with about a dozen agents from the Federal Bureau of Land Management. Well, with all due respect, that is an absolute flat-out lie. They're characterizing this as a 1,000-man strong coalition against a dozen federal agents. That's untrue. There were not only a dozen federal agents, actually probably about 2 dozen it looked like to me, but in addition to that, there were hundreds of state and city or state police there. There were sheriffs there. There were highway patrol there. There were literally almost as many law enforcement as it appears that there were protesters down there. To go on, they say, citing public safety, the BLM retreated, suspending its operations and even handing back cattle it had already seized. Now, that's now they're making it look like the BLM went bent over backwards to try to appease these people, when in reality, that's not what happened at all. I mean, anyone who watched this knows that the BLM did not beneficently and magnanimously say, well, I'll tell you what, let's just give you the cattle back and, we'll all part friends. Goes on to say, no shots were fired during the standoff, which Bundy's triumphant supporters swiftly dubbed the Battle of Bunkerville. But the government's decision to withdraw in the face of armed resistance has alarmed some, who worry that it has set a dangerous precedent and emboldened militia groups. Well, guess what? That's a good thing, not a bad thing. But you'll notice the tone and the tenor that they try to use to make it a concern, and then they enforce that by quoting the Southern Poverty Law Center. So here comes the quote that is designed to set the hook, right? Do laws no longer apply when the radical right no longer agrees, said Ryan Lenz, a writer for the Southern Poverty Law Center, which monitors militia group activity? Boom. You see, you were given the bait. There was a worm that was wiggling. You bit down on the worm, and they set the hook. Going on, it says, armed Americans using the threat of a gunfight to force federal officers to back down is virtually... Now, this is not the Southern Poverty Law Center. This is now Reuters saying this. Armed Americans using the threat of a gunfight to force federal officers to back down is virtually unparalleled in the modern era, militia experts said. But the BLM, and they're obviously anonymous militia experts, but the BLM, which says it is now pursuing legal and administrative options to resolve the dispute, has won praise for stepping back and avoiding violence. Folks, they've turned the entire thing around. The BLM was the aggressor here, not the other way around. These people were merely defending a family from that which, one, federal courts have already found acted in a conspiratorial manner with intent to cause harm. That's a criminal, that is a criminal action. It's incredible how they try to twist remember now that a lot of the people reading this from Reuters are going to be either people from the left, or people who are on the fence or never even heard about the Bundys, or are international, because Reuters is one of the largest news distribution agencies. Goes on to say, energized by their success, Bundy supporters are already talking about where else they can exercise armed defiance. They include groups deeply suspicious of what they see as a bloated, overreaching government they fear wants to restrict their constitutional right to bear arms. That's not true. It's not a question of restricting the right to constitutional bearing of arms. That had nothing. Where was that discussed in the Bundy issue at all? See, what they're trying to do is paint anyone who is a supporter or a participant of the militia or Bundy as a gun zealot, a radical right extremist for guns. Well, with all due respect, guess what? Your gun rights deserve extremist perspective. If the government attempts to take them, they are constitutionally guaranteed to you in writing. They were given to you by God and by nature. The right to defend yourself, not the right to this gun or that gun or any other gun. It's not the gun. It's the right that is inherent to you as a living, breathing human being, that no government, irrespective of how tyrannical they become, has the right to take from you. Then they throw this in to really set the hook and to light the fire. Alex Jones, a radio host and anti-government conspiracy theorist, whose popular right-wing website, InfoWars, helped popularize Bundy's dispute, called it a watershed moment. Then they throw in this quote. Notice how they characterize him. a radio host, and anti-government conspiracy theorist. Ladies and gentlemen, that is propaganda straight off the pages of Goebbels' Goebbels' textbook, whose popular right-wing website helped popularize Bundy's dispute. Well, with all due respect, I tell you what, Alex Jones wasn't the one who brought all of the attention to this. He did a great job of covering it. Who really brought the attention to this? The Drudge Report. Because the mainstream media refused to talk about it. But Drudge put it out there, and they were the ones who forced the mainstream media to cover that which everybody's saying, wow, why am I not seeing something about this on CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, MSNBC, Fox? Then they quote Alex Jones. Americans showed up with guns and said, no, you're not, before confronting the armed BLM agents, Jones said it in a telephone interview. And they said, shoot us. And they did not. That's epic, and it's going to happen more. Now, just listening to the sound of that, you can tell that this was taken out of context. We have no idea what the context of this was. And the way it's full of inflammatory wording designed to make him sound like, you know, it's an esoteric quote pulled out of the middle of somewhere else in a long stream of thought, apparently. And listen, I'm the first one to say Alex Jones goes off half-cocked and in some cases does not do the Patriot movement an enormous amount of benefit. I mean, I'm referring to as an example to his discussion with that British nincompoop who, you know, he went off on a gun rights issue. And he made us all look like a bunch of crazy kooks with that, you know, going off half-cocked. They go on to say, militia experts interviewed by Reuters. Now, we know who that is. That's the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is, by the way, a hate speech group in and of itself because they demonize anybody that does not agree with their ultra-extremist left-wing thought. So they don't use their name again, but here's what they do. They say militia experts interviewed by Reuters say they could not think of another example in recent decades where different militia groups had banded together to offer armed resistance to thwart a law enforcement operation. Well, first of all, we know what they're talking about. They're talking about Southern Poverty Law Center because they already named them once before. But now they neglect to name them again because they don't want to continue to push that. They're relying upon only one position, right, or one opinion. Secondly, they put these people out as experts. Experts at what? And who's to say that they're experts? Was it my Aunt Tilly who's an expert? I mean, you know, what makes the guy, Ryan, whatever his name was, Ryan Lenz, the writer for the Southern Poverty Law Center, an expert? Where is his bona fides? Where is his experience? Where is his empirical, extensive background in understanding what is and is not a militia? Or is he coming from a biased viewpoint? So he's not really an expert if he only comes from one perspective. They could not think of another example in recent decades where different militia groups banded together to offer armed resistance to thwart a law enforcement operation. Notice how they couch it. In the days since the showdown, right-wing websites have begun searching for other Bundys. Several conservative and survivalist blogs have seized on the case of Tommy Henderson, a rancher in the Texas-Oklahoma border who they say is fighting BLM attempts to seize some of his land. Notice now how they don't bring up the point of Hagee, Wayne Hagee. Why? Because Wayne Hagee won in the same court that they're trying to show you does not agree with Bundy. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not unbiased news. This is nothing but dripping propaganda, like dripping from the fangs of a slavering monster. Then they go on to have another paragraph, military fatigues and rifles. I'm not going to get through this morning, I can see that. But I want you to understand the implications of what this what the mainstream media is doing. This is being read by people who don't know what a militia is. It's being read by people who are, agnostic about guns, maybe. But this is attempting to incite them to fall to the bias side against and make everyone look like some kind of a dangerous kook. It goes on to say, few people have heard of Bundy and his ranch until a few days before the standoff. Stop right there. That's the fault of the mainstream media. They had plenty of opportunity to talk about that instead of Kim Kardashian's ass, but they didn't. They had plenty of time to talk about that instead of lavishing praise on Hillary Clinton, but they didn't. They had plenty of time to talk about that instead of endlessly talking about Flight 370 on Communist News Network, but they didn't. Reading on, right-wing websites and advocacy groups, such as Americans for Prosperity, founded by one of the billionaire industrialist Koch brothers, cast his tale in a folksy David and Goliath light and helped spread it online. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a golden nugget of propaganda, seeded into the sand, like they used to sell gold mines years ago. They would seed it with a little bit of gold, knowing that it was nothing but a desert hole in the ground. And they would plant gold nuggets in and around it so that when the investor came in and kicked over a piece of dirt, there is a gold nugget, and he's like, okay, I'll buy it. Listen to that. Few people have heard of Bundy and his ranch until a few days before the standoff. Right-wing websites, doesn't name any of them, and advocacy groups, such as, now here's where it gets critical, Americans for Prosperity, founded by one of the billionaire industrialist Koch brothers, cast his tale in a folksy David and Goliath light and helped spread it online. Do you hear the dripping sarcasm? Do you hear the injection of, first of all, the advocacy group of Americans for Prosperity, who I haven't heard Americans for Prosperity talk about any of this. And where did the Koch brothers have anything to do with the Bundys? They're not part of the Alex Jones network, are they? No, they're not. They're not part of Drudge Report, are they? No, they're not. They're not part of any of the independent alternative media organizations, because you know what? The Koch brothers aren't supporting us. They're supporting Karl Rove and his traitorous minions. Honestly, Koch brothers, here's a call to you. Support alternative media who will actually tell America the truth. Then it goes on to even now they go on to inject Richard Mack into it. Someone who has known Bundy since his early 1990s fallout with the BLM is Richard Mack, a former Arizona sheriff who founded the militia group Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. Folks, how did the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association become a militia group? Listen to what you are being injected with. This is the propaganda of a thousand cuts. No one cut alone will inject the poison into your system, but they continue to cut you and slice you here and there in little ways so that they can inject poison at multiple points. I got to tell you, I have never thought of the CSPOA as a militia group. These are not militia people. These are active members of sheriffs that are in counties around the United States. They are active law enforcement in police chiefs and cities. This is not, I tell you what, I'm going to cut this next segment, which is immigration. I'm going to move the cycle down because I'm going to finish this article with you. This is so treasonous, so unconscionable. Unbelievable. You're listening to America's Voice. Stick with us. We're going to finish this article when we come back because this is very, very important stuff. And I got to tell you, this is more important than almost anything else, because you need to understand how you're being lied to and how the public is being set against you. This is what engenders. This is the same crap they did to the Jews in Nazi Germany. Well, it's all those rich shopkeepers and Jews who withhold. We'll be right back.